Dr. Hachiya records that at this moment he began to suspect that the US might have used a bacterial or chemical bomb on Hiroshima. 1 second, dear? What bacteria and chemicals? President Truman said, "Guys, this is an atomic bomb. My friend, don't be so cruel." Hiroshima was isolated from everything that happened around it. No newspapers reached it, and the radio towers there had been destroyed. This left its residents still unaware of what weapon was thrown at them. While the whole world was talking about the atomic bomb, no one in Hiroshima knew that people were talking about it and that they had become the talk of the world and the world's first victims of the atomic bomb. Dr. Hachiya records that the first time he knew that what was thrown at them was called an atomic bomb was a week after the bombing, when one of the doctors came to help from a nearby city and commented, saying that the atomic bomb was a very terrible thing. Here, the rumor was confirmed that America used this terrible weapon on the city of Hiroshima to make life in this city before the bomb one chapter and what came after another chapter entirely, not only in Hiroshima but in the whole world. The new chapter would witness Hiroshima become a city uninhabitable for decades. On August 15, 1945, for the first time in their history, the Japanese heard the voice of the Japanese emperor while delivering a surrender speech. When some residents of Hiroshima heard the speech through the few radios that managed to pick up the signal, many of the people of Hiroshima were crying bitterly. Not because Japan lost, nor because Japan surrendered, but because if this surrender letter had come only 9 days earlier, none of this would have happened. It could have saved their fate, which was not only terrifying, but also unknown and incomprehensible. Until now, we don't know where these diseases and symptoms will end. The issue is not just a tragedy in the loss of family, loved ones, housing and home. This is a future where every sentence ends in a question mark. We don't know what will happen to us in the coming days. Will we wake up alive or dead? Question marks were not only from the people of Hiroshima, but they were also from those who threw the bomb at them. Let me tell you that until the time Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, no one knew exactly the effects of exposure to this huge amount of radiation. Humans and the environment, after being exposed to this amount of radiation, how would they look? And what effect it had not only at the moment of the explosion, but in the days, months and years that followed. This knowledge absent from the world, we will begin to know it little by little. The people of Hiroshima will begin to know it before anyone else with every new symptom that appears on those infected. For example, you have purple spots that mean death. During autopsies, they discovered that it was a symptom of internal bleeding that happened to organs whose cells were destroyed by radiation.
After a week, a new symptom began to appear. People started losing hair on their heads. Hair fell out for no apparent reason. And after a very few days, these people also died. Once again, panic reigned in Hiroshima. Every time a symptom appears, it leads to death. People started to pull their hair and their kids' hair to check whether their hair was falling out or not. On September 3, 1945, the Japanese professor, Dr. Masao Suzuki, arrived in Hiroshima. Sorry, my friend, this is the Hiroshima accent. This doctor had been experimenting on rabbits by exposing them to radiation. He had important studies in the field of radiation effects. And here, the few doctors left in Hiroshima thought that they could find a solution for these people on the hands of this distinguished professor who had done a lot of research related to exposure to radiation and could easily prescribe treatment for them and stop this cruel wheel of death. But my friend, he shocked them. He said, "There is nothing we can do for the injured except provide them with rest and good food." That's all, doctor? That's all. The idea, my friend, is that even rest and eating well were very difficult in Hiroshima. What comfort in a country where most of the population had died? What fresh food in a city that was one step away from famine? This simply meant surrender to death. In short, my friend, the only person in Japan who could have had a solution to this problem, said that there was no solution. When the first foreign aid arrived to this stricken city through the Red Cross mission, they said the situation was very difficult and demanded the largest amount of medical supplies as quickly as possible. Journalists from the Allied countries began arriving in the city and witnessed daily deaths and the strange effects of the bomb. European and American newspapers published that something strange was happening in Hiroshima. There was something mysterious that the media called the atomic bomb plague. When the Americans felt global pressure, their generals began to reassure the people, okay, the bomb is done with its effect, and no one will die from it again. This was the news the world was waiting to hear, but of course, my friend, unfortunately, this did not happen. With Japanese newspapers publishing the tragic news coming from Hiroshima, General Douglas MacArthur, the American military governor of Japan, who was present after Japan's surrender and its occupation by America, warned Japanese newspapers against hot headlines and the misuse of the Hiroshima crisis. We, Mr. General, will say more delicate articles. An American bomb lights up the sky of Hiroshima in a morning carnival, illuminating the faces of the population. American doctors recommend using radiation to freshen the skin and increase fertility. How will we say it, sir? How will we say it? You made a disaster. You committed a humanitarian crime that to this day you haven't apologized for. What added salt to the wound was that on September 19, 1945, Japanese newspapers were censored and were prohibited from publishing any information about the atomic bomb. But when John Hersey, a New Yorker journalist, visited Hiroshima and wrote an article of 31,000 words, it was published in an entire issue of the magazine in August 1946. The strange irony was that when the Americans saw the article in their newspapers, they got to know the details of the Hiroshima tragedy, while the Japanese, who were hit by the bomb, didn't know these details. Most Japanese people didn't know what happened in Hiroshima because their newspapers in Japan were forbidden from publishing about it. There was a complete media blockade there. For example, you have the Japanese director Akira Iwasaki. Of course, this is not Akira Kurosawa, the well-known Japanese director. I'm a member of a cinema club, you see. I see Abbas Kiarostami. When you see the first Abbas, you can talk to me. This director, my dear, visited Hiroshima and recorded footage of the devastation that occurred there and the deplorable humanitarian situation. But unfortunately, these tapes were confiscated and went to the American military archives. They were classified there as top secret and didn't come to light until many years later. Also, the research unit at the Riken Institute in Tokyo, which was studying the effects of nuclear radiation, faced orders to dismantle it and destroy its factories under the pretext of preventing Japan from arming itself in the future. But of course, my friend, the Americans' greatest concern at that time simply, pragmatically, and clearly was not to distort America's great victory and not to distort the amazing invention that brought absolute power to them, the power with which they would rule the world.
And so, my friend, as the days passed and as life slowly returned to Hiroshima and as the people were trying to forget what happened to them, they convinced themselves that all this was long gone history and life would go on. Other unpleasant surprises appeared for the people of Hiroshima, the first of which was cancer. First, my friend, you have a major disaster and huge fires, and people have died. After that, people would go to the bathroom 10, 20, 30, 50 or 60 times. After that, the spots that meant death within days. After that, hair loss occurred, which meant death within days. Enough, all good, no more traces of the bomb. Years later, we find cancers. The percentage of getting leukemia for people who were close to the center of the bomb rose to be 50 times the normal rate. Not only leukemia, there were other cancers, thyroid, breast and lung cancer, whose incidence increased more than 3 times. Of course, the suffering that followed was psychological suffering. Over the years, the demographic composition of Hiroshima changed. Hiroshima, at the time of the bombing, had a population of 340,000 people. Of this population, between 100 and 140,000 people died as a result of the atomic bomb. It was noticed that many of the 340,000 people were either recruits or strangers to the city. They also left after the war ended. After the war, people from other cities began to come and go to Hiroshima. What brought them, dear? They didn't find anything other than this. This is a city just hit by a bomb. Hasty, my friend, hasty in happy and sad stories alike. Dear, why the shaming? A city in crisis means job opportunities. When the grocer dies, the doctor dies, and the engineer dies, there is room for employment. This is a black comedy. Also, my friend, think that this is a disaster-stricken city, meaning it needs reconstruction, and that means work and money. Changing the demographic composition made the bombing survivors, who were in the city at the time of the bomb and are still living to this day, called hibakusha, and they are a minority among the new population. Not only did they not see what they saw, they also did not hear about it because of the media embargo that was in place in Japan. Dozens of hibakusha began to live in a dark side that no one knew anything about. the horrific psychological impact that tens of thousands of infected people went through. Darkness coming from the psychological effect of what they saw with their own eyes. This is a real trauma, my friend, losing your family, your home, and you are burned and left on the verge of a pit of death, living years of stress and anxiety if you develop symptoms that kill you after a few days. This trauma still lives on. You don't know what you will end up with. Tens of thousands of infected people, many of whom had obvious physical deformities, unfortunately, began to be treated as outcasts everywhere. Who would marry someone who has these fires? Again, we still do not know what effect this has on the children, on the succession. These people were rejected and forbidden from entering public places. The people who came to the city after that were avoiding seeing the victims of the explosion because their appearance was depressing and uncomfortable. Of course, the business owners refused to give them jobs because they got tired quickly and always needed health follow-up in hospitals. The situation of girls and women who were exposed to these deformities was much worse than this. They paid a much more expensive price. Some of them were no longer able to go out into the street at all. They stayed in their homes for years because they were ashamed of their appearance. Some people refrained from giving birth to children because they were afraid that the children would appear deformed. The effect of radiation, my dear, was not only physical. Radiation left the residents of Hiroshima with a great feeling of guilt because of their actions when the bomb was dropped. For example, who did not stop to help someone? The one who tried and ran away and left someone calling for help, or the one who abandoned his sisters and family under the influence of panic. Also, suicide cases among Hibakusha increased. Some of them were unable to adapt to their injuries and deformities, or with the new reality in which every day there was a fear of death if any new traces of radiation appeared. This is besides their feeling that they had turned into laboratory rats from the first moment. The process was completely devoid of humanity. Even after the disaster happened, when the Americans set up a lab in the city to study the effects of the atomic bomb and study its consequences on the victims, every death in Hiroshima became an experience with routine procedures instead of a momentous event where we stand with sadness. When a person died, suddenly the military jeep belonging to the US forces deployed there appeared to ask his family to hand over his body for autopsy for medical research purposes. After many years, when the body samples returned to Japan again, the Japanese writer Takashi Ito went to see them in the laboratories of Hiroshima University. He wrote about tens of thousands of internal organs preserved in formalin, and feeling sad these organs might belong to people he knew and he dealt with. The people of Hiroshima, my dear, didn't stay alone much. There were global campaigns in solidarity with them. Some of them were in America itself. For example, in 1949, when the American journalist Norman Cousins returned and published a report on the horrors he saw, published in the Saturday Review, the article gained widespread sympathy at the time. It opened the eyes of Americans more to the catastrophe caused by the bomb. Norman Cousins was not satisfied with the article. He launched a number of huge campaigns in solidarity with the people of Hiroshima, like the Atomic Bomb Orphans campaign, that drew the world's attention to the presence of 4,000 orphaned children as a result of the atomic bomb. He also succeeded in working on a project that got American citizens to cover the expenses of 400 of these children until they finished their education and relied on themselves. Not only that, Cousins launched a project he called Hiroshima Maidens. Hiroshima Maidens. He called for the treatment of girls whose faces were disfigured by the bomb and getting them free plastic surgery in America. And indeed, one of the medical institutions in New York adopted this campaign, and the victim girls traveled and spent months being treated for the deformities in America. In April 1947, Shinzo Hamai was elected mayor of Hiroshima. This man had strong plans not only to remove Hiroshima from its unfortunate reality, but also to transform it into a global symbol. The mayor of Hiroshima had a vision that what happened in the city was bigger than just being specific to it. This was an event that the whole world needed to hear about and learn from. Also, recovering Hiroshima from its destruction was not only important for its residents, but important for the whole world to realize the horror and ugliness of the atomic bomb. And no one uses it again. In 1949, the city's mayor wrote a message of peace from the people of Hiroshima to the whole world. The letter was signed by 110,000 Hibakusha, the indigenous people who attended the bomb explosion. This message was carried by the American journalist Norman Cousins, who delivered it to the Secretary General of the United Nations. Is he a secretary or a general? Dear, the message said, the people of Hiroshima don't want anything from the world other than them being a symbol of peace and for humanity to know what happened to them to make sure that this never happens again. At the same time, the Japanese parliament passed a law declaring the city of Hiroshima a symbol of world peace. He began to transform the drop site of the atomic bomb, the hypercenter, into a global symbol. The Peace Park was built on this center on an area of 120,000 square meters. One of its most important landmarks is the Peace Dome. The dome was an industrial exhibition building which was made of concrete. At the moment of the bombing, its location was exactly under the center of the bomb. This dome miraculously escaped destruction, and this dome remained standing alone, like a sad, speechless witness that attended everything from beginning to end. A witness standing in the middle of a city that had become ruins. Today, UNESCO considers the dome one of the World Heritage symbols. In the middle of the park, we see the memorial of the nuclear bomb. Inside it contains the names of all known victims of the bomb. On this monument is written, "Let all the souls here rest in peace, for we shall not repeat." Over time, Hiroshima has not only turned into a city calling for peace and now reminds the world of the danger of nuclear weapons, but it has also launched huge initiatives to spread the culture of peace around the world. It launches initiatives to confront problems such as poverty and illiteracy. These initiatives are so large that the Baptists for Peace initiative had more than 8,200 cities participated in more than 166 countries around the world. Even today, millions of people visit Hiroshima every year to see how it transformed from a completely destroyed city to a city where every corner has a garden, and all its streets carry one word: peace. My friend, this only leaves us with the question, will the world learn from this harsh lesson of this long and painful suffering? Maybe the world was lucky that for 78 years, and despite all the enormous conflicts, this destructive weapon wasn't used again. But my friend, although this weapon hadn't been used, its production did not stop. The state of greed to produce more of this weapon has not yet ended. According to the UN, the world today contains more than 22,000 atomic bombs. So we wonder if the owners of these bombs will one day come and use them. Or did Hiroshima and Nagasaki carve an eternal lesson in history? The lesson of their pain, suffering, and tragedy. In the end, my friend, I don't want you to worry. I want to reassure you. If these bombs aren't used, we will keep waiting. If they strike, 22,000 atomic bombs will surely end our existence. We will no longer be there to feel them. We will never know. This is an optimistic message. And in case you want to live in a state of denial, you have the oasis of knowledge, and you can entertain yourself with it. There are old episodes and new ones, and sources to check out below. And subscribe if you're on YouTube.